My name is Victoria, and I'm a 37-year-old woman living with my mother in my parent house. My life hasn't turned out quite the way I imagined, but I am proud of the choices I've made, especially when it comes to taking care of my mom. 5 years ago, my mother went through a serious health crisis and had to have heart surgery. There was even a time when we were told to prepare for the worst, but thankfully she pulled through. She's had a remarkable recovery and is still with us today. She visits the hospital every 3 weeks for checkups and takes her medication daily, which helps her stay healthy. She's also committed to exercising, which has made a huge difference. Since her illness, I've dedicated myself to helping her live a comfortable and happy life. I work full-time and life is busy, but I still look forward to weekends when we can spend time together. One of our favorite things to do is try out new cafes nearby. Just last week, I heard about a place that serves a special strawberry parfait, and I suggested we go check it out this weekend. Mom, how about a trip to the new cafe this Sunday? They have a strawberry parfait I think you'd love. She smiled and agreed. That sounds delicious, Victoria. I'm looking forward to it. Moments like these make all the hard work worthwhile. My mother and I both cherish our little outings, which give us something to look forward to amidst our busy schedules. It's these small joys that help us both keep going. However, things aren't easy at home, especially with my family situation. After my father passed away, my brother and his wife treated me poorly. They see me as a burden for still living at home, but I stay because I want to be there for my mother. My brother, who believes he's the rightful heir to manage our family's company, shouted at me to leave the house. His wife even threw water at me and laughed, mocking me for being dependent on my mother. They don't understand my situation or respect my role as my mother's caregiver. I won't tolerate being treated this way any longer. I've decided to cut ties with them completely and will take any steps necessary to defend myself and my mother. Even though my life has had its ups and downs, I'm proud to support my mother and lead an independent life, even if it looks different from what others expect. I may not have married or started a family of my own as I once dreamed, but I am strong, and I find joy and purpose in caring for my mom and building a life that suits us both. I've put a lot of effort into supporting my mother's treatment and helping her stay healthy. Most of the time, she has to be careful about her diet and follow specific restrictions. However, once a month, her doctor gives her permission to eat whatever she likes, and we both look forward to this special day. It's our chance to go out and enjoy a nice meal together, and she truly loves this little treat. You might think it's unusual for a 37-year-old to still be living at home and going on outings with her mother, but these moments are precious to me, and they make me happy. My father is not very talkative, but he enjoys listening to our conversations. He often tells us, listening to you two feels like watching a comedy show. My mom and I just laugh, saying, we're just having some girl talks. My father works hard running his own company, so he comes home tired each evening. His routine is simple. He likes to sit on the living room sofa, relax with a beer, and watch TV. Over the years, he's handed some responsibilities over to his employees, so his work isn't as physically demanding as it used to be, but he still puts in a lot of effort. I admire my father for working so hard for our family every day. Recently, I've noticed he's been having days where he doesn't feel well, and given his age, it wouldn't be surprising if he started thinking about who should take over the company. One day, I asked him, Dad, are you thinking of letting Dylan take over the company? You seem really tired lately. My father looked serious and replied, I would never hand it over to Dylan. I'd rather give it to someone else than let him run it. My older brother, Dylan, is 3 years older than me, and while I thought he'd eventually take over, my father feels differently. They have a tense relationship, and it's been that way since my brother became an adult. My father believes that if Dylan managed the company, it would go downhill fast. He doesn't just lack business sense, he's also careless with money, my dad said, clearly frustrated. Curious about their strained relationship, I once asked my mother about it. She explained that during Dylan's college years, he had some serious financial issues. At that time, our family's finances were tight, and the company was just starting to grow. It seems my brother made some unwise decisions that still bother my father to this day. Though I don't know all the details, I understand my father's concerns. It's tough watching him struggle with the idea of letting go of his company, but I trust he'll make the right decision when the time comes. I decided to go to a less expensive public high school to help ease the financial burden on our family. Meanwhile, my older brother, Dylan, attended a private school, which was much more costly. He didn't work part-time like I did to help out. Instead, he spent his time having fun, without much responsibility. Even as an adult, my father asked Dylan multiple times to help with the family business, hoping he would take some interest. But Dylan always refused, saying, "Why should I help out with a failing company? You started it, so deal with it yourself." Dylan didn't just refuse to help. He even used the company's money for his nightlife and personal expenses, and eventually, he became hard to control. My parents tried to hide this from me, but over time, it was clear that they were struggling with Dylan's actions. My mother once shared, "I don't understand why Dylan turned out so selfish. We raised both of you the same way, and we didn't spoil him in particular." She looked sad as she spoke, and I could tell it hurt her deeply. Dylan, now 40, has recently announced he's getting married to his girlfriend, who is 6 years younger than him. They've been together for a while, and just last week, he called me to let me know he planned to bring her over to introduce her to the family. But instead of calling our parents directly, he called me. Next week, I'm bringing my girlfriend over to meet everyone. It's a serious visit, so the house should be clean. Make sure Dad and Mom know we're coming, and tell them to tidy up, he said bluntly. I was surprised he didn't want to speak to our parents directly. "Why are you telling me this? Why don't you talk to them yourselves?" I asked, but he ignored my question. Despite feeling frustrated, I told my parents to avoid the surprise of an unexpected visit. "Dylan is coming next weekend with his girlfriend for a marriage greeting," I told them. He could have said it himself instead of asking me, but he hasn't changed a bit. My parents sighed, and there was a long silence. Despite everything, they hoped that if the marriage went well, Dylan might visit less often and spend less money. "Let's prepare for this meeting as if it were the last," my father said firmly. When the weekend came, Dylan arrived with his fiancée. He walked in and said casually, "It's been a while. Sorry I couldn't get in touch sooner." My parents and I welcomed them, trying to make the best of the situation, even though Dylan's attitude hadn't changed. "Victoria probably told you, but I'm getting married to my girlfriend," Dylan said casually. Then his fiancée, Joanna, introduced herself. "Nice to meet you, I'm Joanna. Please remember me," she said, looking smug. She was dressed in a short skirt with heavy makeup, and her attitude felt anything but respectful. Her smirk and the way she carried herself didn't seem appropriate for a first-time greeting, especially for a marriage introduction. My family was shocked, but Dylan didn't seem bothered. It was almost as if he found her attitude normal. To break the tension, my mother asked politely, "Joanna, do you work somewhere?" Joanna looked annoyed and replied, "Work? No, I'm not working right now." "Is that a problem?" Then she added, "I plan to be a housewife. I have no intention of working after marriage, and I definitely won't be helping out with your family business." No one had even mentioned our father's company, yet Joanna threw this comment in as if she was trying to pick a fight. Her words made my parents and me uncomfortable, but we decided to stay calm and let it go. After Dylan and Joanna left, we had a long conversation about it. What was she thinking, acting like that? She talked as if our family business meant nothing, my father said angrily. What does he see in someone so rude and full of herself? Are people like that these days? My mother added, sounding upset. No, Mom. Not everyone is like that, I replied, trying to reassure her. That evening, Dylan and Joanna were the only topic of conversation at our dinner table. We all agreed it would be best to keep some distance from Dylan and his future wife. 10 days later, Dylan called me again. We're moving forward with the marriage. We'll register it soon and plan the wedding ceremony later. Make sure to tell Dad and Mom to prepare a wedding gift. And since you're working, I'm counting on you to give a decent gift, too, he said, almost as if it was my responsibility. To avoid any complaints, I gave Dylan a generous gift. Later, Joanna called to thank me, but I could hear her chewing on food during the call. Thanks for the gift money, she said. I thought your father's company was struggling, so I'm lucky to get anything at all. What? Struggling? I asked, shocked. My father's company isn't huge, but it's stable with around 50 employees, and there's no financial trouble. Her comment showed how little she knew or cared about her family. It left me even more certain that keeping our distance from them was the best choice. When I questioned Joanna about her rude comments, she just laughed mockingly. Feeling upset and hurt, I quickly ended the call. Her words, which seemed to insult my father, left me feeling sad and angry. Then, about a month later, something unexpected happened in our family. I had taken a day off work to accompany my mom to her regular hospital checkup. That morning, our home phone, rarely used and nearly forgotten, suddenly rang. We had even thought about canceling our landline service, so hearing it ring caught me off guard. I picked it up, and it was one of my father's employees on the line. I could hear panic in his trembling voice. Something terrible has happened. The president suddenly clutched his chest and collapsed. We called an ambulance, and he's being taken to the hospital. Could you please come right away? He said. My mother, who was getting ready for her checkup, saw the look on my face and immediately knew something was wrong. Victoria, what happened? Is everything okay? Dad collapsed and has been taken to the hospital by ambulance. We need to hurry, Mom. Without wasting any time, we grabbed a taxi and headed to the hospital. During the ride, we both felt a heavy sense of worry, but kept praying for my dad's safety. Once we arrived, we rushed to the reception, gave my father's name, and were directed to the emergency department. A nurse with a serious expression came over and guided us to a room. With trembling hands, I opened the door and saw my father lying on the bed. He was gone. My mother and I stood there in shock, unable to speak, as the doctor gently explained what had happened. When the ambulance arrived, he was already in cardiac arrest. We tried everything we could to revive him, but he never regained consciousness. I'm very sorry, he said. My father had suffered an acute heart attack, and despite all their efforts, they couldn't save him. The suddenness of it was hard to accept. But seeing his calm and peaceful expression, I felt a small bit of relief, thinking he might finally be at rest after working so hard for us all his life. I had informed my brother, Dylan, about what happened while we were on our way to the hospital. His response, however, was cold. I'm at work and can't just leave like you can. It's probably nothing serious, so don't make such a big deal out of it, he said before hanging up abruptly. Even after losing our father, Dylan's behavior showed no change. His lack of concern felt like yet another blow, but at that moment, all I could focus on was my mother and dealing with our grief. When I told Dylan about our father's passing, his reply was heartless. I see, well, I guess it was just his time. Better that than him becoming an old burden, he said. I was shocked. How could he be so cold? While my mother and I were deeply grieving, his words made me feel disgusted with him. Still, even in our sadness, life didn't pause for us. We had to make the funeral arrangements and deal with everything that comes after. As we prepared for the funeral, I started to think about my father's company. What will happen to the company? There are employees who depend on it, I whispered to myself. Hearing this, my mother took out a thick notebook. This is your father's guide for running the business. He worked on this for years, putting in all his knowledge and experience. If you're willing, Victoria, he wanted you to take over. What do you think? She asked. The notebook was packed with my father's insights and strategies for the company. Holding it, I felt his presence and dedication. Even though I was still grieving, I knew that after the funeral, I'd have to step up. I'll do it, Mom. I'll try my best, I said, feeling a sense of duty. Deep down, I had always thought that one day I might need to take over the family business. The day of the funeral came quickly, and to my shock, Dylan and his wife showed no respect for the occasion. During the service, they made a completely inappropriate statement. Victoria, how long do you plan to keep living off our parents and staying in this house? Dylan sneered. What are you talking about? I asked, completely confused as to why they would bring this up during the funeral. You're just a freeloader here, he continued, as the eldest son. I'm taking over the company. You need to pack your things and get out of here. You're too old to be living off Mom. Get a life and be independent. His wife then picked up a glass of water and threw it in my face, laughing loudly. I was humiliated and furious. This was too much. There was no reason for them to treat me this way, especially at such a sensitive time. I couldn't stay silent anymore. I decided right then that I would cut ties with Dylan and his wife. I couldn't let this disrespect continue. Fine, I'll leave this house, I said, determined to move forward on my own terms. I knew I would take on my father's legacy and prove that I didn't need them. When I told Dylan and his wife that I would be moving out, they looked almost too happy about it. Great. Now the company and the house will be ours, Dylan said, smiling. And with Mom living with us, we can take care of her pension too. That's right, Dylan. You'll be the president, and I'll be the president's wife. We'll be rich, his wife added with excitement. I watched them talk about their future, feeling disgusted. But I decided not to tell them that my father had actually chosen me to take over the company. I kept quiet, thinking it would be best to reveal the truth after the funeral. Pretending to be upset, I packed my bags and left as they had demanded. At the funeral, Dylan couldn't resist showing off. He spoke to my father's employees and said, "From now on, as the eldest son, I'll be taking over the company. I hope you'll support me." He ignored the sad atmosphere and made it all about himself. My mother, seeing this, sighed in disappointment. She could hardly believe his lack of respect. Dylan and his wife had no idea what was actually happening. After the funeral, I had to handle a lot of tasks related to the company, so I stayed busy. During this time, I noticed my phone had over 100 missed calls and messages from Dylan. I finally decided to answer the next call. "What did you do?" Dylan yelled. "I went to Dad's company, and they told me that his daughter is the next president. I quit my job thinking I would take over. How could you keep this from me?" His words were jumbled, and he sounded shocked and angry. He had confidently gone to the company to introduce himself as the new president, only to be told he wasn't in charge. The employees apparently weren't welcoming him, and he was furious. "Dad would never leave the company to someone like you, who only thinks about himself," I replied calmly. "And I heard you and your wife have big gambling debts. That's no secret." Dylan was stunned.
What? How do you know that?
"I never told anyone. When I left my previous job to take over my father's company, a former boss had advised me, when you have family involved, especially one with money troubles, it's wise to check their background." Taking his advice, I had done some digging and learned that Dylan and his wife were indeed deep in gambling debts. It was clear that my father's choice to leave the company to me had been the right one. Dylan's actions showed he only cared about himself, and I was determined to protect what my father had built. "I had you and your wife investigated," I said firmly. "How are you planning to pay off those huge debts? Were you hoping to use Dad's money? Is that why you wanted to kick me out and move back home? That's incredibly selfish." Dylan was stunned and speechless. His debts, along with his wife's, had grown to an enormous amount. But I was determined that they wouldn't touch a penny of what Dad left behind. Dad's last wish was for me to take over the company, and soon the lawyer would confirm it through his will. I told Dylan, "The will is already set, and you won't be receiving any money."
What?
"That's a lie." Dylan's panic came through the phone. I couldn't help but feel a sense of satisfaction. Then, his wife grabbed the phone and started yelling at me. "How could you be so heartless? Your brother is suffering, and as his sister, you should help him. You're the worst." I could have argued back, but it didn't seem worth it. Calmly, I replied, "You made those debts. They are not my responsibility or Mom's. Please don't contact us again. Your choices now are to work hard to pay off your debt or declare bankruptcy. Good luck." Before I could hear more of her yelling, I ended the call. Now, Dylan and his wife would have to face the consequences of their choices. They had depended on Dad's money and ignored the importance of family, and now they would have to deal with their debts on their own. A few days later, I found more messages from them on my answering machine, but I ignored them. They had started working at a new factory job, but from what I heard, they were arguing constantly, and a divorce seemed likely. I was relieved, and I had no intention of letting them interfere in my life or in the business that I was now in charge of. From here on, I planned to fully focus on growing the company as Dad had wanted. My decision to cut all ties with Dylan and his wife was final. I felt a sense of peace, knowing that I had taken control of my life and respected my father's wishes. In the end, I found my own form of closure. They had to live with the outcome of their actions, and I could finally move forward, knowing that my father's legacy was in safe hands.